Can people really change? It's one of the oldest questions that human beings have asked throughout history. And if you've lived long enough, you've probably seen both sides of the argument. You've seen some people who've made miraculous changes. Maybe they've lost 100 pounds and kept it off through the years. Maybe they were workaholics, angry, grumpy, and suddenly they're a person who is calm and grounded and very pleasant to be around. And people have gone through very miraculous changes throughout their life. And then there are some people who just don't seem to change at all. They seem that like they're just going to be that way the rest of their lives. You might have a friend who's had a very unhealthy relationship and you're like, she's never going to give it up. Or maybe you have a family member who behaves very badly and then apologizes for that behavior. And it keeps going on for years and years and years. Or maybe you have a coworker who is just really rotten to be around and you hate being around them. And you're like, they're never going to change. So either I hope they leave or I have to leave. But which is it? Do people actually change or do they always stay the same? Or is it something else? And today I want to explore this question through various lenses, through some literature. We'll look at what some mythologies have said about people changing. And then I'm going to talk about what Ayurveda has to say about transformation, because all these traditions speak very different languages and they all wrestle, though, with the same question, which is what makes a human being become someone different? I'm Heather Grzych. I am the host of the Wisdom of the Body podcast. I'm an author, I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner, and I'm so excited that you're here today. Please reach out if you have questions after this is over. Okay. I've written multiple genres now, and one of the reasons that I love stories from different traditions, spiritual traditions, religions, great literature as well, they allow us to see human beings over time. So if you meet somebody in real life, you usually meet them in the middle of their story. You don't know what happened to them 20 years ago. You don't know what kind of family they grew up in. You don't know what has shaped them. You don't know what they've lost. You don't know what they've survived or what they believed. And you don't know that maybe they've been spending years trying to hide something. But when you read a novel gives us something that life rarely gives us, unless you do healing work, which I do, and you really get to listen to everybody's stories when you spend a lot of time with them. But when you read fiction, you read novels, or you see movies, you get to see something that real life rarely gives you, which is perspective. The idea that a person's character develops chapter by chapter. We see their tiny decisions, we see their disappointments, and we see their relationships, their betrayals, their victories, their habits, and all of the things that have shaped them to become who they are, the people that influence them, the events that happen to them. And then when we finally reach the end of the book, we often understand exactly why that character made the choices that they did. We may not agree with them, but it's one of the greatest gifts that telling stories offers us. And they replace our judgment with curiosity about, like, who is this person? What have they been through? And where are they going? What is this transformation that they're going to go through? And the behavior doesn't appear out of nowhere in a story. You can see that it grows much like a tree. If you've ever planted something, you know that what you see above the soil is only part of the story. The leaves tell you something, but so do the roots, and so does the amount of sunlight or the soil or the water, the wind, the insects, the season. And the gardener looks at a struggling plant. It doesn't say that plant just needs to try harder. No, they say, what are the conditions that produced this outcome, this situation for this tree? And as someone who has spent years in healthcare and working with people in healing work, I often find myself the same question when I'm working with organizations and groups of people, because organizations, they don't suddenly become innovative or dysfunctional. They don't become suddenly financially healthy or financially unstable overnight. They become the natural result of hundreds of decisions that are made over many years, because culture accumulates, the leadership accumulates, the incentives accumulate, and the conditions produce the outcome. And Ayurveda, which is the science of life, it's a really cool form of traditional medicine that comes from India, which I happened to stumble upon in my 30s and dedicated a lot of my life to. Ayurveda asks remarkably similar questions about the human body. So we look at the macrocosm and the microcosm, so the body and then what the body is in, the systems that the body are in. So when we ask the questions about the body, we're not simply asking what symptom do you have? We're asking, well, what are the conditions that are shaping this person? What have they been eating? How have they been sleeping? What kind of season are they in their life? Or what kind of work do they do? Or what emotions have they carried with them from events in their life? What relationships surround them? What's in their field? What's in their history? And what conditions have become normal? So every body has a story. And you learn this as you talk to people, as you become someone's friend, if you do healing work with people. And we learn this about characters. We don't always learn this about the people in our lives. And I wonder if the same is true about character. Maybe character isn't something that we're born with. Maybe it's something that's gradually cultivated by thousands of small moments. And that brings me to one of my favorite works, which is Victor Hugo's Les Misérables, which maybe you've seen in the theater. And it's, Victor Hugo introduces us to Jean Valjean, who's a man that the world has already judged. Years earlier, he stole something, right? He stole bread. He stole it not to get rich. He stole it not because of greed. He stole it because his sister's children were starving. And for that single act, he was sentenced to prison. And he remained there for 19 years. 19 years, okay? It's an incredible story. And 2 decades of hard labor, 2 decades of being identified as a number. Imagine being in prison for 9 years. No, thank you. And believing and hearing that you're a criminal, you're bad, you're a criminal. And when he's finally released, he's not really free. He's super angry. Because I don't know, how would you feel if you got stuck in jail because you were trying to help your sister starving kids, right? He's jaded, he's suspicious, he's hardened, and he learned that the world doesn't trust him, and he stops trusting the world. And everywhere he goes, people turn him away. And nobody wants to, would you take a prisoner into your home? I probably wouldn't. Nobody wants to give you a place to sleep. One evening, though, there is a person who opens his door to Jean Valjean. And he allows him to come in, he serves him dinner, he treats him really well, and he gives him a warm bed. And he treats him with something he's never experienced in a very long time, and that's dignity. But during the night, Jean Valjean steals something from the bishop. He steals the silver and then he runs away. And he's quickly caught by the police. And the officers march him back to the bishop's house. He's got the silver. It's very clear he committed the crime. And the bishop, the person that took him in, has one sentence to speak. Just one. And if he tells the truth, this guy's going back to prison. And his life is essentially over. And the bishop smiles and he tells the officers, I gave him the silver. I gave him the silver. And then he looks at Jean Valjean and he's like, my friend, something like, you forgot your candlesticks. And he hands him 2 silver candlesticks. So he adds to his silver collection. And then the police leave. And Jean Valjean is standing there in complete disbelief because he can't understand what just happened. He can't understand that the bishop has done this kindness for him. And whether you're religious or not, Victor Hugo writes that the bishop had purchased his soul for God. Okay, so if you're religious or not, there's something profoundly human happening here. And because perhaps for the first time in decades, someone refused to define this guy, Jean Valjean, by the worst thing he has ever done. And somebody gives him mercy. And this one act of mercy, it interrupted 19 years of conditioning. So here's the question. Was it the bishop who changed Jean Valjean? Or was Jean Valjean finally ready to receive what the bishop offered? Because here's something fascinating. Mercy was offered to Jean Valjean. Transformation was not forced. Jean Valjean still had a choice. He could have sold the silver, gone back to stealing, and returned the only identity he had ever known, been that person again. And instead, he built an entirely different life. He became a factory owner, he became a mayor, he became this really fancy person in service of other people. Not because he forgot his past, but because he no longer believed that his past had to determine his future. Now, in Victor Hugo's story, there's another man, and that's Javert, Inspector Javert. Every great novelist understands something. You have to see the opposite, right? In order to understand one thing, you often have to see its opposite. It's one of the reasons in Ayurveda we look at opposite qualities of hot and cold and light and dry when we're trying to understand what's happening with a person physiologically in their body. So you have to see the opposite. In this case, you have to see Inspector Javert. Inspector Javert is one of literature's most fascinating characters because he's like the order guy. Rules, justice for him, the world's very simple. You're good or you're bad. You follow the rules or you don't. And it's just very clear. There's no gray area with this. There's no redemption that a person's going to go through. There's no second chances. It's just like you follow the law or you don't follow the law. And in Javert's mind, Jean Valjean is always going to be a criminal because he did that, because he stole that bread and he went to jail. But years pass, and Javert spends much of his life trying to capture him until finally the roles reverse. Jean Valjean has the opportunity to kill the man who has hunted him for years. And instead, he lets him go and he offers him mercy. And the very same gift that bishop had offered Jean Valjean, he now has offered to Javert. And there's grace. Both of these men encounter grace. They both experience mercy. Now, Jean Valjean allows his moment to reshape him, but Javert cannot. Javert, his entire understanding of the world begins to collapse, because if a criminal can become good, what the heck does that mean? If mercy can just be like, well, it just come out of nowhere, what does that mean? And if people can truly change, what else have I misunderstood? Like, if I believe that you're either good or you're bad, and all of a sudden I see that a person can change, that totally breaks my worldview. So Javert cannot reconcile these questions, and it's really challenging for him. And he had a very fixed way he saw the world, and ultimately this destroys him because his way of seeing the world was so fixed, and it was how he operated. And I think that's why these two characters have stayed with readers, with people who've gone to see the play for so many years, because Victor Hugo isn't really asking whether Jean Valjean changed. He's asking really a different question, which is what makes transformation possible? Why does one person encounter love and become softer? And why does another person, when they're encountering love, become suspicious? Why does one person survive tragedy and become very generous while another becomes consumed by bitterness? Or why does one person receive a second chance and build a new life while another spends decades repeating the same exact story over and over and over again? And these are not just literary questions. They're questions every one of us eventually has to ask about our own life, because somewhere along the way, life offers us moments that invite us to become someone different. And the question is, what is it that allows us to say yes? What is it? And what's remarkable is that this question it's not just unique for Victor Hugo. We've been wrestling with this question for thousands of years. Can people really change, or is it just something that we hope is true? I don't know how many times I've been told by people, oh, he's not going to change. He's not going to change. And I'm sitting here going like, probably, but like maybe not. What if he does change? And what is it about that person, that circumstance that creates the change? Greek mythology, it asks what role the gods play in human destiny. The great epics of India, they ask whether we already possess the qualities that we need, but have simply forgotten them. And they're different traditions, but they have a similar mystery. Like, how does a person become someone new? Achieve things that they wouldn't be expected to achieve? In Christianity, one of the central ideas is grace. And grace, it's not something that we earn. It's like a gift. right? It's unmerited favor. When there's grace, something's offered before we've proven ourselves worthy of receiving it. It's like, wow, how am I even worthy of receiving this? If you've ever forgiven someone who didn't deserve it, or you've been forgiven when you knew you had failed, or maybe you've experienced something that your logic alone struggles to explain, that grace doesn't erase the past, but it refuses to let the past have the final word. And that's what the bishop offered Jean Valjean. He didn't give him permission or approval or a new beginning. He just gave him that opportunity for grace. And that's why kindness has so much power. Because when someone believes you can become something more than your worst mistake, sometimes you begin believing it too. And when you believe something different about yourself, there's a whole bunch of things that are possible. And in the ancient Greeks, they had a different way to look at it. In Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus spends 10 years trying to return home after the Trojan War. And his journey is full of storms and monsters and temptations and impossible decisions. And throughout the story, the goddess Athena repeatedly intervenes. It's like Odysseus is a little piece on a chessboard that she keeps moving around. She does things for him. She disguises him. She protects him. She advises him. And she creates opportunities that he never could have created on his own. But she never rows the ship. She never faces the Cyclops. She never resists the beautiful sirens. Odysseus still has to make the difficult choices himself. He still has to go through it. The gods may open a door. Oh, this is the whole thing with divine intervention. The door may be opened, but the hero still has to walk through it. And I think there's very, very profound stuff in there, because there's a whole bunch of things that we resist in our lives. I mean, think about it. How many opportunities have appeared in your own life because another person believed in you? Maybe it was a teacher or a friend or a colleague, a mentor, maybe even a complete stranger. Someone opened a door for you that you couldn't have opened alone. But eventually you still had to decide whether to walk through it. One of my favorite moments in the Ramayana, which is one of the stories from Vedic literature, tells a very similar story. Hanuman is preparing for what seems to be an impossible task. He has to leap across an entire ocean to go find this chick, Sita. But before he can do it, he hesitates. And it's not because he lacks strength, because he's very strong, but he has forgotten that he possesses it. He doesn't know that he's got all this strength. And then another character actually has to come into the story to remind Hanuman who he really is, that he has the strength, remind him of everything he's forgotten about himself. And then that's when Hanuman makes the leap. And I've loved that story because it suggests that transformation it's not about becoming someone else. Sometimes it's remembering something essential that was there all along. Maybe courage, for example, isn't something that we acquire. Maybe it's something that we recover. Yeah. Maybe compassion is the same way. Maybe wisdom is the same. These things that we think we have to get, maybe they're just in there the whole time and we have to remember them. Sometimes another person doesn't give us a new identity. They just remind us that there's one there that we've forgotten. And in Ayurveda, there's yet another perspective, which recognizes that each of us comes into this world with a unique constitution, our prakriti, or our inherent nature. But then life happens and stress happens and loss happens and we get poor sleep or long work hours, or we have grief or conflict, emotional turbulence or illness or some bad habit that we created. And those experiences, they gradually create what's called vikruti. So prakriti is like your nature that you're born with, and vikruti is the ways that we've moved away from our natural balance. And that's why in Ayurveda, we don't just ask, well, what disease do you have? No, that's not really it. It asks, like, what happened along the way? What conditions shaped this person? What accumulated? What became normal? And as we've talked about in previous episodes, a gardener doesn't criticize a plant that's struggling. The gardener looks at the conditions and the soil, the light, the water, the temperature, the season, and makes adjustments. But there's something that's very different from humans. In humans, that's different than plants. And that's that plants don't choose where they're rooted, right? So we are essentially having to be gardeners for ourselves. The tomato plant doesn't look at another tomato plant and say, I'll never let my leaves turn brown like yours. It just responds to the conditions it's living in. But we're different because we have imagination and we have agency, we have choice. No, we can't control every circumstance, but we can decide what we expose ourselves to. We can change our habits, our relationships, our homes, our work, our environment, the books that we read, all the things that we consider food in Ayurveda, the things that come into our senses, the information. We consider all of this food in Ayurveda. And we often talk about how Ayurveda, it's one of the forms of complementary medicine that deals a lot with the way that we assimilate the things that come in through our senses. We deal a lot with nutrition, but we're also dealing with what else has come in through the senses. The media we consume, the food we eat, the people that we trust, right? We can change the story that we tell ourselves about what is possible. That is a type of food we've been feeding ourselves. There's this idea in Ayurveda of daiva, which is like the parts of life that remain beyond our control. And then there's another concept of what is within our effort, right? So there's what's beyond our control and what is within our own effort. And there's a balance there because we are neither completely in control nor are we completely powerless. And life is always going to hand us circumstances that we didn't choose. And our work is deciding what we do next. So perhaps this question that I asked everybody in the beginning isn't simply like, can people change? Maybe history answers that for us. We know people can. Of course they can. But maybe it's a better question to ask that what is it that makes transformation possible? Sometimes it's grace. Sometimes it's suffering, and sometimes it's truth. Sometimes it's another human being who sees something in us that we've stopped seeing in ourselves. And sometimes it's like a quiet decision to stop living as that person that we needed to be yesterday and begin becoming a person that we need to be today, or that our life is actually asking us to become. And one thing I've noticed in my practice with my clients and my own life as well is that transformation, it doesn't feel comfortable when it's happening. I was just talking with a client the other day and she was like, remember how much I reacted when we did that cleanse. Remember how uncomfortable it was for me. Remember how much I complained. And she was looking back and reflecting on it and that she felt amazing at the end of it. So we tend to imagine change as exciting and liberating, empowering, and sometimes it is. Sometimes it feels like enlivening and amazing and almost manic. Sometimes it's confusing, and sometimes you don't feel like yourself anymore, and sometimes you're really uncomfortable. You start to question decisions that you've made for years. You're like, why am I doing this in the first place? There's a lot of different defense mechanisms that come in when we change. And habits, our habits that feel automatic, they start to feel strained, and our relationships shift and parts of your identity start to loosen. And in Ayurveda, we understand that the body is constantly adapting to the conditions that it's given. And when those conditions begin to change, that body notices. And sometimes it notices before the mind does. And think about the person that loses 100 pounds and keeps it off. People always talk about the diet, what they do, or the exercise that the person did. But something much deeper has happened. At some point, they stopped trying to become that healthier person and they began living as one. That's a big shift. Daily choices are becoming expressions of a new identity rather than attempts to force an old identity into a new behavior. We change. It's very different. That's why transformation usually takes much longer than we want. The body has to trust the new life before it begins to feel normal. And then maybe you've experienced this. You begin saying no to things that you used to say yes to. You go to bed earlier, you stop answering every text immediately, you eat differently, you have reverence differently, maybe you pray, you think differently. And it feels at first like you've lost yourself, but perhaps what you've really lost is like just these habits that no longer fit that person that you're becoming. And weird as it is, even habits that are not good for you can feel really uncomfortable when you drop them. So when I think about back to Les Misérables, Jean Valjean, the guy that went through this transformation, I don't think his greatest miracle was becoming a good man. I think his greatest miracle was believing that becoming a good man was still possible. And maybe that's where every transformation begins. No, it's not with the certainty or confidence or possibility, but with allowing yourself to imagine that tomorrow doesn't have to look exactly like it did yesterday. One conversation, one book, one loss, one diagnosis, one act of kindness. That event might become the chapter that changes everything. And it's not because your life suddenly became easier, not because you became someone different while living it. So we always think that change happens the day we make a decision. And then we get frustrated when it doesn't happen right away. But this change begins the day that we become the kind of person who would make that decision in the first place. That's a very deep shift inside. It's a profound distinction. And people don't get healthy because they ate one healthy meal. That's why people, they make an inch of progress and then they go back. It's not because you had one healthy meal. They eat healthy meals because over time they begin to see themselves as someone who values health, as a person who eats healthy meals because they want to be healthy, not because they're a person who's not healthy who has to force this thing of eating health. Jean Valjean did not become compassionate because he performed compassionate acts. Somebody showed him mercy. And that showing of mercy changed his understanding of who he could be, and then his actions followed. So go out there, make your decisions to believe that you can be a person that can change. And if you believe that you can be a person that can change and you do the work and you stay aligned, it's amazing. And I really wish you a lot of luck in this process. And I love to hear, as this goes on for you, how it's going and what kind of changes you've been through. Thanks so much for being here today. Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. Visit heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.